Mr. Glenn Kimball, as we trace some incredible discoveries starting in Michigan and probably going all around the planet. He's next on Coast to Coast AM. Glenn Kimball has a B.A. degree in journalism and M.A. in communications. In addition, he has successfully completed all the coursework for a Ph.D. in communications. His doctoral exams, he's passed, lacking, though, his dissertation, but he's getting close, I bet. He was the former president of International Exchange School, vice president of 2 cell phone companies. He has taught school at Southern Illinois University. Students there loved him and was ranked by student evaluations in the top 10 instructors in the universe. He's been collecting ancient texts since the age of 15. Very famous for being able to integrate very diverse texts into a contiguous storyline. He's our special guest tonight on Coast to Coast. Hey, Glenn, how are you? Welcome back.
I'm doing just terrific, George. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, too. This is an interesting discovery, Glenn, in Michigan, isn't it?
It's absolutely bizarre. We've known about it for some time, but, we have to segment out one little piece of evidence at a time to explore this history of the Americas, because there's so much available. If you take it all at once, it's too much to assimilate all at the same time.
Tell us this story. How were they found, first of all?
Well, first of all, the Michigan tablets, they have been finding artifacts in these mounds, these man-made mounds, since the 1850s. Our country's not that old. We're talking about the people leaving the East Coast and heading west somewhere around 1840, 1850s, and venturing into these wildernesses. These man-made, to give you some sort of numerical idea of what we're talking about here, between the borders of Canada and the Gulf of Mexico and the East Coast and just west of the Mississippi, there are 100,000, or at least were at one time, 100,000 man-made mounds. That's an awfully lot.
That's a lot, Glenn.
That's more than are found in Egypt. That's more than are found in Egypt and the entire Middle East put together. And we don't know any of the story of these mounds. Now, there are 2 basic types of mounds that are found in this region. One of the mounds, there are some aberrations to this, but there are basically 2 types. One is a flat-top mound that looks like a raised stage, like they had built a temple or a building on top of it, or we're using it for some sort of public communication or ceremonial purposes.
Right.
They didn't find any bones in these kind of mounds. The other kind of mound is a very rounded mound that was obviously a burial mound because they found a lot of bones, and this is where you find the artifacts. In 1 of 8 of those mounds that were rounded, they have found artifacts over the centuries. Over the last century.
And Glenn, the significance of this, of course, a number of things. First of all, how ancient are they? How did they get there? Who made them? How was the traveling? I mean, if, for example, they're Egyptian, and that's possible, we'll talk about that in a second, that means they could have come over here when? Thousands of years ago?
We know that the records and the archaeology and anthropology of the Americas is every bit as old as that is in Africa. If you only include those ancestral forms that belong in our genealogical record, obviously Neanderthal man and Cro-Magnon man are not our direct ancestors, and scientists have proved that with DNA technology at this point in time. But for those ancestors, the bones that have actually been found that have been proven to be in our lineage, we have the bones in Chile and in the Americas that are every bit as old as those in Africa and in the Far East. So obviously, there were people here in this part of the world simultaneously with people in that part of the world. And whether we like it or whether we don't, or whether we acknowledge it or whether we don't, they had communication with each other, and there was interchange between the two of them. As a matter of fact, there was a merchant relationship, and we're going to show that tonight on the radio.
If it's, let's say, Egyptian or even any type of era way gone back, how in the heck did they get here, Glenn? I mean, could these small boats have gotten them across the ocean?
Well, we presume that the state of technology of ocean craft is evolved to the state of the Renaissance period of time where the clipper ships were built. But I'm going to tell you that the capability of ocean travel was greater, historically speaking, as far back as 1800 years B.C. than it was at the time of the Renaissance period of time. As a matter of fact, to illustrate this point, the Phoenician vessels, when they docked with these Michigan copper tablets off the coast of Alexandria, there just at the Nile Delta region, the Phoenicians wouldn't even allow the boats to come to shore. They wouldn't allow any of the purchasers of the copper to visit the boats. They did not want to have anybody see their technology because that was the secret to gaining wealth. It was the ability to sail the oceans of the world that was their secret. You know, we have Pythagorean's theorem, which was a secret. But by the time of Jesus, the greatest secret in the world was that you could travel 40 times farther in a boat in a day than you could by a caravan, and it would cost you one-third the price to transport goods from one place to another. So the boats, the technology, we're thinking about the boats being the same as those that Christopher Columbus used, the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, which were little teeny tiny little vessels that scurried across the ocean and risked the ocean wave. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about seaworthy craft that cross the oceans. And by the way, if you even if there is some suspect about the capability of the construction of these vessels, if you go to England, then you go on to Iceland, then you go on to Greenland, then you come down through Nova Scotia into the Americas, you're only talking about 300 miles of the whack, roughly, distance between each of those land ports. So we're talking about really being able to follow a land mapping situation. And by the way, the maps now that are pre-Columbian, first of all, our good friend Gunnar Thompson, you're going to have him on the air someday. This man is absolutely amazing. He's written a new book called The Secret Voyages.
Sure.
Contains 9 of the voyages to the Americas. 9 of them.
Way before Christopher Columbus, right?
Way before Christ.
Oh, my gosh.
He talks about people coming here for various and sundry reasons. And by the way, he was a protege of Thor Heyerdahl, who wrote the book Kon-Tiki. I'm sure you're aware of him. He was the one. He was a protege of him and began his diffusionism philosophies back when he studied with Thor Heyerdahl. And he's also spent the last considerable period of time in Beijing, China, convincing the Chinese government that their maps of the world were real. The pre-Columbian maps that they had in their libraries were real, and he was successful at doing that. He's got this new book out that's on my website, very limited printing, Secret Voyages, that's absolutely stunningly sensational. And the one thing that's good about Gunnar is the fact that he writes so that everyone can understand it.
Glenn, when we come back, let's talk about these tablets. Tell us if they've been deciphered, if we know what they are, and much more to go with our special guest tonight. I started him a little early tonight, Glenn Kimball. And yes, we'll still use your phone calls with him in his last hour with us. And then we'll have just general open lines in the 4th hour of the program. I'm George Norrie, back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Hey, take advantage of the double CD offer while it still exists. The old Father Malachi Martin interviews with Art Bell. When you subscribe to the After Dark newsletter, you will get the 2 programs. Call 1-888-727-5505, or you can go online. It's very safe and secure at coasttocoastam.com. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. Glenn Kimball with us. Glenn, how many of these tablets were found in Michigan?
In Michigan alone, there's one collection with 1,500 in it. It is estimated with the amount that we have talked to people that they have in their possession. There was roughly between 5,000 and 10,000 tablets just in Michigan. In all of the mounds, if you extend beyond Michigan, we're talking about somewhere 30,000 or more. And most of these things had writings on them. The problem with the tablets is the fact that the historians and linguists could not read the writings. This is the same old problem they had before Napoleon invaded Egypt. And the reason why they were so keen on the Rosetta Stone is that these writings have been something that have been very difficult for linguists to decipher. With the exception now, we now have a scholar who's identified the writings that were in Illinois as being ancient Negev. Now, ancient Negev is a language that was written between Jerusalem and Egypt, down in the southern part near Edom, in that area of the world, and he can decipher 80% of it. The languages that were in Michigan are a composite of Coptic, Phoenician, Greek, and Hebrew. Most languages are a composite of other languages.
So it's not unusual.
It's not unusual at all. But the fact that they couldn't read them was very disturbing to the scholars. It made them one of the reasons why they have been so frowned upon over the years. But it's not that there aren't commonalities on all of the stones. Anyone who would have thought that someone had fraudulently forged all of these tablets, first of all, it would have taken an army of people to forge them. It would have taken a master linguist of all times, and it would have taken an army of people to bury them in 30 different states. That's just ridiculous to think of that possibility. But the Michigan tablets themselves, the collection we're talking about, is a collection that was kept intact. It floated all the way. It was kept together. It was willed by a gentleman who had gathered them together and sent them to a guy named Milton R. Hunter in Salt Lake City for a Salt Lake City Art Museum. They had a guy from BYU come up and take 20 minutes to evaluate the veracity of these 1,500 stones. I don't know how you can evaluate the veracity of 1,500 stones in 20 minutes. He declared them to be all forgeries. They sent them back to the state of Michigan, and they're now held by the state of Michigan incognito. Wayne May has made, from the Ancient American magazine, who's been the champion of this cause and the hero of this cause, made an offer to buy them from the state of Michigan for $50,000, and they turned him down.
They turned him down. Now, some of the tablets, are they all stone or some of them made with copper?
There's some made with copper, but they're principally made of clay and slate. That's the principal writing matrix upon which they're written. Now, when you talk about the stones found in all of the locations, we're talking about them being made of all kinds of different stones, and you'll see some of those on your website are a variety of different stone matrices, sediments, sedimentary, metamorphic rock, etc. So,
anything that could resemble periods of Egypt or Rome or Greece or any of those ancient eras?
No, they weren't done there. These stones, the stones that we found, have all been indigenous of Michigan or the place where they were found. They were obviously written here in the Americas by people here in the Americas.
By people in the Americas. But do you think these people came here or they were already here?
They came here, obviously, and that's what the object of this night is all about. Is that let's identify the problem here during the Copper Age. How much copper was needed to, for example, to chisel out the pyramids?
I would say a lot of copper.
Well, bronze is made out of 88% copper and 12% tin, roughly those percentages.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've ever been to the pyramids, which I have been, and you look at how precision these stones are cut and how well they fit together, you can't fit a knife blade between these stones. Now, Zahiwas is a good man and says, "Hey, man, they could have chiseled these stones," and he demonstrates by taking a copper chisel out and breaking a stone, but breaking a stone is not the same as chiseling it into a precise formation and fitting it into a slot. Exactly. And when you're using copper elements to do these kinds of things, you're talking about a malleable metal that would have worn itself out in a flash. And the amount of copper necessary just to create the pyramids would have dwarfed the amount of copper that was available in Egypt. Even if you include all of the Egyptian copper mines, which were low-grade copper, and there were very few of them, if you included any of them in the in the Grecian Isles or in Cyprus, or if you included the ones in Rio Tinto in Spain, if you included all of those mines together, they couldn't have produced or smelted 10% of the copper just to build the pyramids, let alone the Parthenon, Abu Simbel, Karnak, Luxor, Tel Armana. I mean, how many ancient temples are there in Greece and Egypt alone?
It's countless. The find is fascinating, Glenn. But what do archaeologists say about this? Do they accept these discoveries, or do they just throw them away?
Well, in terms of the actual stones themselves, they've ignored them. it's kind of like something they don't want to entertain at this moment because no one's had courage to step up and say anything. Though they all admit the fact that they've been looking for the source of copper for the Bronze Age for a considerable period of time because they've never been able to identify the source. But now, the source of the copper was there was one place in the world that had the highest grade copper of any place in the world during the 1800-year BC era of time, and that was in Michigan. It was the purest copper ever. There are 2,000 mines in Michigan from the period around 1800 years BC that were mining copper. Now, what in the world were 2,000 mines mining copper there for?
It sounds like a huge worldwide enterprise, doesn't it?
It does, and they made copper ingots of a very unique shape. Wayne May says that it's called the buffalo hide shape, which it looks like someone had stretched the buffalo hide in the four corners. These are very unique shaped ingots. They're not like ingot bars or ingot coins or ingot circles. This is a very unique shape of copper ingot that was only produced in Michigan. We now have evidence, and it's on your website now, that there are reliefs in Luxor with Egyptian construction personnel carrying these copper ingots in Egypt, and we found the very same shape of copper ingots in Knossos in Greece. The very same copper ingots, and by the way, those were found after the find of the copper ingots in Michigan, so no one sold it before. So no one sold the archaeology here. The ingots were found in Michigan first, and then they were found in Knossos.
How significant are these discoveries in terms of chronologically talking about the origination of mankind to this indigenous area?
Well, it's really critical because Knossos, you have to understand the city of Knossos. The Knossos has been around, or was around, since about 8,000 years BC. By the time of the Bronze Age, they were getting rich. They built the city, the great complex there in Knossos. That was it consisted of 20,000 square meters in one building and 1,400 rooms, ornately decorated, and they built it based on the sale of saffron, which was a genetically engineered agricultural product from the ancients, and also from the sale of copper. And they didn't have the copper there in Cyprus to be able to sell. They had to be getting it somewhere else, and where they got it was from the Phoenician sailors who it took them 3 years to go out and get it and to bring it back. And that's absolutely critical because it was the merchandising ability of the Phoenicians centered in Knossos. And Knossos is a very interesting place because Knossos was the originator of all the collections of the Gnostics, which were eventually taken and were the basic component of the great Alexandria library at the time of Cleopatra. It
was almost a repository for ancient knowledge, wasn't it?
It most certainly was. That's what the Greeks were famous for, was collecting ancient wisdom. The classes that we've been offering lately have been demonstrating that. Hesiod, who is almost unknown by anyone who may not be Greek, Hesiod was a gatherer of information, and by the time of Alexander the Great, he assigned Demetrius Phaleron to gather all these documents and take them into Alexandria, and there were some 760,000 scrolls at that particular moment in history gathered by the Greeks, placed in Egypt, and under the protection of the Greek pharaohs of Egypt in the Ptolemy dynasty. But not one in 10 of the scholars who have written about the Nag Hammadi text has any idea about the city of Knossos and the antiquity of their beliefs and their histories. They're prolific in being able to talk about the Nag Hammadi find and the nature of the leather-bound scrolls and some interesting things about Egyptian Gnosticism, but they have no idea of the origin of the original Gnostic beliefs that were very, very ancient.
What are the possibilities, Glenn, that in this city that they also had like the Hall of Records that Edgar Casey believes, is at the base of the Sphinx. What about a Hall of Records in this region of, Atlantis and stories like that? Possible?
Well, they most certainly did. They had the story. One of the things that perplexes me about those who go out seeking for the Isle of Atlantis, they really should read the records of Hesiod, not the ones from Plato. Hesiod gives you the entire details of all the four epics of time prior to our epic of time described by the coming of Adam and Eve into the world. The original epic of time being the Golden Age under King Kronos, then the Silver Age, and then the Age of Lemuria, and then the Age of Atlantis. These weren't just cities; these were entire worldwide cultures. And so, someone out looking for the city of Atlantis on the Isle of Thera, or trying to find it in the Caribbean at the Bimini Trail, or trying to find it in South America. All of that is just absolutely craziness, because they demonstrate that they don't understand history. Not that they're bad people. I love them to death, and I hope that they succeed in their finds, because we'll help them too. But these societies were worldwide, and the Bible mentions them. The Bible mentions them as being the men of old, the men of renown. They were already here when Adam and Eve came, and were interested in the daughters of Eve and intermarried with the people here. That doesn't deny any of the Judeo-Christian philosophies at all, because all of these four epics of time prior to the coming of Adam and Eve had the same messianic belief system, where they believed that there would come a man into the world born of virgin birth, heal the sick, raise the dead, die on a cross, be resurrected, and save the world of their sins. I mean, all of them had that tradition, and they all believed in the millennial era of time, when the world would be at peace for 1,000 years and then a final judgment. All of them had that same basic general tradition for all those epics of time. Even the Sumerians did.
I assume once they came here, did they also go back?
Yes. We know, for example, that not only did they bring copper from Michigan to Greece and to Egypt, but they also brought on those same sailing vessels indigenous people here. They called them the Phoenicians or the Keftiu.
Keftiu.
Now, the Phoenicians means the red men. The Keftiu, or the Chieftains, were the chieftains. These were the men who had mined the copper, who wanted to come and see the land of their forebears, the land of their fathers, the land of the land where their ancestors had known about and spoke about as well. And many of them stayed in Greece and in Egypt and became part of the societies there, and they became house guests of the pharaohs and house guests of the kings of Greece, etc. And they were depicted on the walls at Luxor. They were taught in the schools in Gnosis and in the histories of the Alexandria Library. These aren't people that are unknown. These have been people that we've known about for a long period of time, but we just haven't been willing to recognize them as coming on the Phoenician vessels with these copper ingots. They said they came from a far-off land. They were not Aegean, so they couldn't have been Greek, and they weren't Minoan. They weren't Egyptian. They weren't Aramaic. These people came from a land which they called the land of the inverted sea. Now think about it for a moment. Where is the inverted sea? It's on the other side of the planet.
To them, true.
It's upside down, isn't it?
Right.
They came from the land of the inverted sea. As a matter of fact, the Egyptians thought these men were holy men. And when the scarabs would follow the sun at night down into the ground, the Egyptians began to worship the scarabs because they thought the scarabs were going to the land of the holy man.
The scarabs are, you mean the beetles?
The beetles. Those little beetles were going to the land of the holy man, and they would come back in the morning from the land of the holy man, of the land of the inverted sea. That's why they began to worship the scarabs, and why the scarabs were on the medallions.
So you're saying people from the Americas went to Egypt, maybe went to Greece willingly?
Most certainly. And by the way, it was reciprocal. We now know, because of the great the 9 voyages that mentioned in the Secret Voyages by Gunnar Thompson, that Hatshepsut, the only woman pharaoh, she figured out what the Phoenicians were doing, that they were getting their copper, which was essential. They weren't just using copper chisels. They were using copper nails, copper ornaments, copper jewelry, copper medical instruments. You look around your house and see what's made out of metal in your own home. They had the same metal needs in their day, but they had no place to get it. Okay, we make it out of steel and iron today. And when the Iron Age came, they replaced the need of copper with the smelting of steel and tin. So they were able to use a different metal, and that's precisely the time of the decline of the city of Gnosis, by the way. So this decline of the city of Gnosis happened at the time when copper was no more necessary, and when they didn't have to sail across the oceans to get it from Michigan.
How did the fact that this all occurred, how did they credit Christopher Columbus with discovering the Americas? What happened to all these other people? Why didn't they get top billing?
Well, we're going to talk about it in a second, but let me just finish Hatshepsut for a minute. Hatshepsut sent an armada to the Americas to get a copper trade established. As a matter of fact, after her time, a man named Hiram of Tyre, have you ever heard of him?
Yes.
Hiram of Tyre was the architect who built the Temple of Solomon. He actually sailed to the Americas, was there, and by the way, he was the one that discovered King Solomon's gold mines that are supposedly lost, brought back the gold that they used to build the Solomon's Temple. That's what they built it out of. Where do you think the lost Solomon gold mines are? Are they in Asia? No, they're in the Americas.
Well, you know what? They've said that the Knights Templar came back here with some of Solomon's treasure. Maybe they put it back in the mines where they got it in the first place.
Well, they certainly were looking for it. And when you say, why do we give credit to Christopher Columbus? Christopher Columbus was using the Friar's map or some other ancient map to come to sail to Cathay to get rich, because the trade had been going on with the Far East and Egypt and the Mediterranean for a very, very long time.
We'll talk more about these ancient discoveries when we come back with Glenn Kimball. His website is linked up right there at coasttocoastam.com. And also, we're going to talk about, earlier, many programs ago, we talked about found caves in southern Illinois. We'll get some updates on that as well.